It's raining again here in Chicago, and I thought with the sound of rain, I'd like to do a recap of the nationwide tour that I just got back from about 2 weeks ago. My band, Origami Button, just went on tour as the opening act for the Hail the Sun Divine Intertention Tour. The tour in support of the band Hail the Sun's new album that came out in August. Also on the tour were the bands Being as an Ocean and Keonashi. I have my all-access pass from tour here. Hail the Sun, who's from Chico, California. Being as an Ocean is from San Diego. And Keonashi was from Philadelphia. And that little name right there, if you can tell, is Origami Button. This is our first full nationwide tour. We were on the road for about 6 weeks. And this tour certainly had a lot of ups and downs. I personally thought the tour was a success. I do have some stories to tell about tour. Some wild ones, some heartwarming ones, some personal ones here and there. And to accompany me, I've got another hot cup of black licorice tea, my favorite. You can see the steam blowing in the wind coming through the window here. It's gonna be raining all day. So, earlier this year, the lead singer of the band Hail the Sun, his name's Donovan, he asked us if we wanted to accompany Hail the Sun on their tour. And as much as I wanted to do it, we weren't sure if we were actually going to get picked in the end to be the opener on the tour, but alas we did. And the tour started in Phoenix, Arizona, which is on the opposite side of the country as Chicago. So it took us a couple days just to get to Phoenix. On the way to Phoenix, Arizona, we almost immediately started having van troubles with our untrusty 2001 GMC conversion van with our U-Haul trailer connected. And it was just struggling to keep up to speed for the majority of the first part of the tour. And struggling to get up hills, and the van would kind of jerk back and forth if we went over 60 miles per hour, but sometimes it would just start and wouldn't stop for hours, kind of unprompted. But thankfully we ended up being able to get everywhere that we needed to go. when we got to Phoenix, Arizona, it was during a heat wave that was going on all throughout the country. And when we arrived there, it was an easy 115 degrees, more like 130. And we were just cooking for the little bit of time that we were wandering around outside. That first show, I knew right away that this tour was going to be a success, that we were going to really fill up some rooms. We got to meet and get to know all the other bands on day one. And it's sometimes a bit intimidating and uncertain where your place is when you're the youngest bunch of guys on the tour, in the opening act, and on the newer side to the live touring circuit. After Phoenix, Arizona, we played in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which naturally we made lots and lots of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul jokes throughout. That was a pretty good show too, and that was a very big venue. Pretty much every show that we played this entire tour, except for maybe Salt Lake City, was bigger than any show that we've ever played in our career since. On the back of my All Access Pass, it has the dates and venues and cities of every show that we played. And after Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the Sunshine Theater, we played in Dallas, Texas, at the Southside Music Hall, which was a venue with a capacity of 1,500, and there was about 1,000 people in attendance, which was the biggest crowd that we've ever played to. And we did pretty good. At least I think so. All things considering, there was one show of the whole tour where our band's in-ear monitoring system had failed us due to an abundance of frequencies that were being occupied in that area. I think it had something to do with nearby government buildings, so we weren't able to use our in-ear monitors, so we ended up using stage monitors, and it worked just fine. After Dallas, we played in San Antonio, and that crowd was also pretty big and pretty packed into that room. The majority of these shows were all sold out, and I'm certain that San Antonio was sold out. I believe Phoenix was also sold out. After San Antonio, we played in Houston, Texas. And in Texas, we've played in Texas before, but the last time we played in Houston was kind of a mediocre experience in terms of turnout and the venue quality, and overall the time we played in Houston on this tour was certainly better. Much better audience, also sold out. After those 3 shows in Texas, we made the long journey to Orlando. However, on our way to Houston, Texas, our AC in our van decided to stop working. And for the first 7 or 8 shows of the tour, it was over 100 degrees. And in Texas, it was about 110. So naturally, we had to get that AC fixed before we made the long journey to Orlando, Florida, which is about 13 hours. It seemed to be a constant issue trying to get van repairs throughout the tour. And the day after our Houston gig, we were driving around for a good while looking for any place that would see us and operate on our van the day of. And the only place we could find that would see us that day ended up being this strange house and garage in these Texas suburbs. In this house directly across from an elementary school. And it was a very odd place to get your car fixed. The guy who ran it literally had a horse in the yard that just wandered around, which seems like a very Texas thing. And he had a bunch of random stuff inside the garage as well. He had a drum kit in there, a bunch of stuff you'd think you'd see at like yard sales, a bunch of like kids' toys in there. Probably the sketchiest bathroom I'd used the entire tour. But alas, we were there for about 4 or 5 hours getting everything fixed. And within that time we were very hungry, but in a neighborhood where there really wasn't much to eat, so we ended up making this entire hike through the 110-degree suburbs to a Little Caesars Pizza, where we ate while standing in the middle of the Little Caesars lobby, because at least it had air conditioning. I got pretty sunburned on that walk and the walk back. At some point, it was so hot that all of us in the van were just not wearing shirts and just sitting at this table in this guy's garage while he fixes our AC with no shirts on. And some woman comes around and starts speaking Spanish, and our guitarist speaks Spanish, so he translated and said that she was asking why there was a bunch of shirtless white boys in our garage. No comment. So it took longer than expected to get our van fixed. And thankfully we had cash in our van. We had plenty of cash, actually. So once that got fixed, we headed on our way to Orlando, Florida. And this was the first of many brutal overnight drives that we had to make. And since we were behind schedule, we got to our hotel in Tallahassee at maybe 5:30 in the morning and had to immediately get up again at 7 in the morning, leave by 8-ish. And that was probably the nicest hotel we had this whole tour too. It was a shame that we didn't get to spend more time in it. Throughout this entire tour, I made an effort to eat complimentary breakfast at every single hotel that we stayed at. No matter how tired I was, I would get up just in time to eat for free. And that hotel in Tallahassee probably had the nicest spread and the best quality of food, best lounge to eat. Even with an hour and a half's worth of sleep, I still made an effort. That was my first time ever being in the state of Florida. Prior to that, there was only 5 states that I'd never stepped foot in. And now the remaining 4 states that I've never been to are Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Alaska. And I can see myself passing through all those states eventually. When we played our show in Orlando, Florida, it was probably one of the worst sounding venues that we had the whole tour. It was in a big concrete room that used to be a bookstore or a library or something, but definitely didn't sound like it would have been. But another sold out show, did pretty well. After Orlando, Florida, we made our way to Atlanta, Georgia. And Atlanta was a city that really, really liked us the last time that we played there, so we had pretty high hopes. And Atlanta did not disappoint. It was a pretty good show, and by far the best green room that we had the whole tour. Had a whole room to ourselves, whole bathroom to ourselves, nice and private, separated from the venue, but it had a very loud air conditioner inside that kind of went on and off unprompted. After Atlanta, Georgia, we played in Greensboro, North Carolina, which was an okay venue. But the entire tour, I think the best that I played was that show in Greensboro, North Carolina. That may have been the best that I've ever played throughout the band's history. Made no mistakes, everything was flawless, tone sounded good. It's a show to remember. So, after Greensboro, North Carolina, we had to play in Manhattan, New York City, which did not have an off day in between, so we had to drive all throughout the night from Greensboro, North Carolina to get to Manhattan, and we got there around 9-10 in the morning in an effort to find parking at a venue that did not provide parking in a city that has notoriously the worst parking in the world. But we made it. And that was a pretty good show. One of the best crowds and the best rooms that we played the whole tour. The green room for that venue was directly below the stage, at least ours was. So there was tremendous amounts of sub-bass coming in from above our green room, so much that there was dust and pebbles falling from the ceiling from all the rumblings. Throughout this tour, we have a writer for things that we request in our green room, like water and snacks and batteries and stuff like that. Looks like the rain's calming down a little bit. And our singer put Triscuits on our rider, which are just like the worst cracker of all the things he could have picked. Wheat Thins, Cheez-Its. We just stockpiled boxes and boxes of Triscuits in our van throughout the tour that seldom got eaten, but became a running joke at some point. So after New York City, we kind of did a bunch of crisscrossing throughout the Northeast there, where we passed through Baltimore to play in New York, and passed through Philly to play in Baltimore, and it was kind of a back and forth of cities for a little bit. But that next show in Baltimore was the first time that we played a venue that had a big LED screen behind us, so we were able to supply our own visuals to be played during our set. And we didn't know this until we were on our way to Baltimore, so real quickly I designed and put together visuals for our set in the van on the way there, and they turned out great in the end. And we ended up using those for a couple of other shows along the tour as well. After Baltimore, we played in Philadelphia. And for those who know me, there goes the train going by. Those know I live right next to the Damon Pink Line station. But anyway, those who know me know that I'm a huge fan of the TV show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. So naturally, a lot of Philadelphia jokes were made while we were there, and we ended up being there for 2 days. The first day of the show, we had technical difficulties. Well, we, as in being as an ocean, on our show, they had a whole backing track system set up for their shows. They don't have a bass player, they just have a pre-recorded bass track, and everything they do goes through this Behringer monitoring system, and for that show in particular, it just died and stopped working. So after 20 minutes of vamping, the band ended up coming out and told the crowd that Being as an Ocean was not going to be playing that night, and disappointing a lot of people. However, while we were in town, another friend of mine that I toured with a few years ago had another band that was playing at another venue that same night. So me and some of the guys in Kawanashi, who were also friends with them, left the venue to go check them out, reconnect a little bit. And it was a place called Bonk's Bar. And ironically enough, Being as an Ocean wanted to set up a makeup show on our off day in Philadelphia so people could still see them. And it was a free show in a room with a 75 cap and a garage leading to the outside with no stage and really no live speaker system at all. But it had one of the craziest overwhelming turnouts that we had this whole tour, and it was the same exact venue that we went to check out my friend's band the night before, which was quite coincidental. For the majority of this tour, Origami Button had about a 30-minute set where we played 6 or 7 songs every night. Same ones, usually the hits, the ones people know. But for that show, that second show in Philly, we decided to play deep cuts and unreleased songs only, which was very refreshing. And there was so many people at that show that they were flooding into the street, and they had to put cones up on each side of the street to steer traffic away because there was just too many people. All throughout this tour, I was able to reconnect with a lot of people I met from the past, and there was a lot of people that I was surprised to see in Philly. Pleasantly surprised, of course. So, we're about 2.5 weeks into the tour, 3 weeks into the tour, and still have not had a single off day. And then we make our way to Boston, Massachusetts. And Boston was a city that I spent a lot of time in when I was in high school. But I didn't have much time to reminisce while I was there. It was a pretty good show. And after Boston, we played in Rochester, New York. And the last time I played in Rochester, we played at the same exact venue called Montage Music Hall. And that was on the tour with Knucklepuck and Snow Willet. And it was a very good show then, but on this tour with Hail the Sun, it's kind of an underwhelming turnout, underwhelming crowd enthusiasm, but they can't all be zingers. We were in Rochester. We went to one of the strangest restaurants, if you can even call it that, of the whole tour. This noodle place that was basically in the lobby of some business plaza that had, apartments, and it also had like real estate offices and lawyers and stuff. It was kind of a strange place to be putting out a restaurant, and of course there was no one there. The entire restaurant was run by this young Asian guy who was basically made every dish and brought it out one by one in this dining area that looked deserted. There was a bunch of bookshelves with a bunch of fake-looking books and a lamp with no shade right in the middle of the room. The guy who was running it had a keyboard at the front desk where you order and pay and all that. And by the time that we were about to leave, I asked him if he would play me something, and he was very, very impressive. Played some classical tune that was beyond me. In Rochester, New York, our drummer started this running joke declaring that Rochester was the greatest city in the world, the city of angels, with a thick Brooklyn accent. And he ended up saying that in every other city that we went to the rest of the tour. So, after Rochester, we spent the next day driving to Detroit, Michigan. And Detroit is another place that I've played in several times and have never been particularly impressed. But this time in Detroit, it was without a doubt the best show that I've ever played there, and one of the best shows and best crowds we've played the whole tour. another sold out show. Really, I'd say 60, 70% of the shows that we played on tour were sold out. It was quite an impressive lineup. It was pretty diverse, so a lot of different fan bases coming together. After Detroit, Michigan, we played in Columbus, Ohio, which I've played at a bunch of times, and that was a pretty strange looking venue. It was called The Basement, and it was in a basement and was very oblong shaped, or the majority of the crowd was kind of pushed off to the side, and there was kind of these stairs leading down to this little pit in front of the stage, and there were like ramps that went nowhere and a bunch of rails that kind of seemed to get in the way. But that was also a really good show. A lot of enthusiasm. Probably the hottest, steamiest room we played the whole tour. So after Columbus, Ohio, we played in our old stomping grounds, our hometown of Chicago, Illinois, at the Bottom Lounge. And this may have been my favorite show of the entire tour. It was about 700 people in attendance. A lot of them were there to see us, and a lot of them were going pretty crazy in the crowd. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces and friends show up to the gig. Sold lots of merchandise there. It was also the one time the entire tour that I actually got to sleep in my own bed. But after that, got right back on the road. We actually ended up doing a bunch of other things in Chicago while we were here, grabbing more merchandise, doing some bank account stuff, some LLC stuff. And before we made it to Chicago, actually, passing through Columbus, we bought an entire new tour van in Indiana because our van was just on the fritz and was definitely not going to make it the rest of the tour, let alone the mountains in Denver, Colorado. So we scraped up about 10 grand to buy this new van, and it ran like a pro, thankfully, but not as comfortable and cozy as our old van. So we drove those two vans back to Chicago and left our old van here and took the new van on the road. And while we were in Chicago, we also got asked by this YouTube channel called Bus Invaders that come and check out the touring rigs of many bands, and we had to do that video with them, owning a van for less than 5 hours. Had pretty much nothing to say about it, no stories, nothing in the van particularly noteworthy. But we pressed on. So from there we had another day where we made our way down to Denver, Colorado, which was a 2-day trip. And in Denver, Colorado, we played in a rather sketchy neighborhood. To be fair, we played in a lot of sketchy neighborhoods throughout the tour, but that was the first one where we pulled up to the venue and there were people right behind the venue, huddled up, squatting down and smoking crack together. Just a little thing to expect. But the show was pretty good. And after Denver, Colorado, we played in Salt Lake City. And Salt Lake City was the worst turnout that we've had the whole tour, and a not particularly enthusiastic crowd either. Kind of a small room as well, but it wasn't too bad. My mom just moved to Salt Lake City, so we had a place to crash after our show on our way to our next gig in Seattle, Washington. And Seattle was a gig that I was particularly excited about because I had a bunch of family and friends coming to see me at that gig at a venue called The Crocodile, which is about a 10-minute walk away from Pike's Place Market down there. Unfortunately, the venue kind of did us dirty, and they accidentally double booked for that show that night. So they booked our show for the tour and another DJ show on the same day by accident, and we ended up having to wrap up the show and by 9 o'clock and be completely packed out by 10, which meant that we all got really shortened sets and we had to push everything sooner, so a lot less people came in for our set, and they were delaying a bunch of the audience members to access the venue prior until about 10-15 minutes before we went on, and we only played 5 songs because that's all we had time for. It was a shame that that had to happen in Seattle, of all shows, which is the one where I would prefer it not to. It was my first time playing in Seattle. This was actually our first time playing on the West Coast. So, after Seattle, this is where the tour took a rather unfortunate detour, and a story that I'm going to have to go over in a video all on its own. But long story short, in Portland, Oregon, the following city, our van that we just bought 6 days ago and our trailer both got stolen by crackheads. And by the end of the night, we tracked them down and stole our van back from the crackheads. And our van, despite being torn apart, was still in drivable condition. But we lost our trailer, we lost thousands of dollars worth of merch. Thankfully, all of our gear was in the venue, but all of our personals were still in the van. So we lost a lot of our belongings, all of our clothes, all of our bags, our blankets, our pillows, But we pressed forward. Since we had the van back, we were able to finish the tour. I'm gonna have to explain the whole story of how we got our van stolen and stole it back in a whole nother video, because that whole night was basically an episode of Seinfeld. Anyway, the next show we played was in Sacramento, California. Another sold-out show, and one of the best shows of the tour. Really, all of the shows we played in California were the best shows of the tour, because that's where Hail the Sun is from. After Sacramento, we played in Berkeley, California, which is basically like San Jose, Oakland, San Francisco. Everyone from those cities all came to see us in Berkeley. was not as hot in California as it was the first 8 days of the tour, thankfully. It was actually pretty cool up there. I hadn't been to California in years. It was nice to step my feet back in there and relive the nostalgia a little bit. After we played in Berkeley, we played in Fresno, California, at one of the sketchiest, most ratchet venues of the tour, which was still sold out, had a really good crowd, and it was a decent show, but kind of a DIY. The people who ran it didn't really seem top-notch. Still better than Salt Lake City. So after that, we played in Los Angeles, California, which was a much anticipated show of the tour, and of course it was sold out. Huge crowd, over 800 people, and despite one of the biggest audiences, they were kind of unenthusiastic. I guess people in Los Angeles are a little too cool to get down at these shows. But I had some old friends, a lot of people from Chicago who moved to Los Angeles that came to that show. It was nice to revisit the venue we played at, called the Regent. Was in a neighborhood called Skid Row, which is notorious for having a lot of drug users and sketchy people wandering the streets. So it was quite interesting to make my way around outside the show and see the butt of the city, if you will. And then after that, our last show of the tour in San Diego, California, our 26th show at a venue called the Soma. And one of my old friends from my hometown that I grew up with, who moved to San Diego, came to that show. It was nice to see him once again. And that was another one of the best shows that we had the entire tour. Just went all out, had a lot of fun with it. Sounded great, played great. A perfect way to end the tour. But at the same time, in San Diego, Hurricane Hillary had also arrived and was causing up a big old storm right there in town. So we planned to stay the night there and ended up having to hit the road immediately to not get caught up in potential disaster. And for the next few hours, it pretty much stormed, and fog was pretty bad, made the drive pretty invisible. And we drove all through the night and all through the next day, all the way to Amarillo, Texas. It was about a 15-hour drive. All in all, we had maybe 6 overnight drives where we drove through the night and just didn't sleep, or just tried to sleep in the van. But the seats in, both vans weren't particularly comfortable like beds. I guess our old van had a really nice bench in it, but the other ones were not as great as you would assume. Yeah. And then after that, we drove all the way to St. Louis, because we borrowed our in-ear monitor rack from another band called Lobby Boxer, who we've toured with before. And just said our goodbyes to them, dropped off the stuff, and made our way back to Chicago, and got back at about 7 in the morning where I didn't even bother going to bed, and then immediately got back up in the morning and got matching tattoos with the band members. Got these little matching origami crane tattoos. And then got diner food, and then came home, and that was the end. There's so much more that I have to say about the tour. I don't even know where to begin. The band Keonashi, they were probably my favorite band to watch every single night. They were a lot of fun, and those dudes definitely knew how to party. We stayed with them in Philadelphia, where they're from, and it was just tons of people out hanging about till all hours in the night, just doing what they do. These are a very connected group of guys and built for the road. They did a bunch of shows on their way to our first gig in Phoenix, and they did a bunch of shows on their way back home after the tour, and then did gigs in between off days, and not long after that they packed their bags and went to Europe to do a tour over there. Hail the Sun was a very impressive band to watch every night. I feel like I learned a lot from not only watching them, but watching the other members of their tour package work that night. Their sound person, their lighting person, their tour manager. There were a couple times where we got to hang out with everybody, but there was only really one day, an off day in California, where we got to spend some quality time with a bunch of people. Went swimming, went to the mall, went to bars, did karaoke, you know. I wish I had taken more photos of the tour. I took plenty, but I feel like I could have taken more. Our guitarist had a Polaroid camera, and he took lots of Polaroids all throughout the tour, and I'm just eagerly waiting for him to get those scanned so that we can see them all. Both Hail the Sun and Being as an Ocean had their own bandwagons and trailers, their own drivers and everything. So they had pretty smooth sailing for the majority of the tour while we did all the driving ourselves. I say that as if I actually did any driving, because I kind of opted out to do it because the band members don't really like my driving. They think I'm a little too crazy, which is accurate because I used to be a delivery driver, and as Brandon says, the rules of the road do not apply to Taylor, which is totally fine because then I can just relax the whole tour and watch movies on my phone. In anticipation for the movie Saw 10, and I'm a big fan of the Saw franchise, I decided to watch all the Saw movies on my phone in the van on drives. Felt like I needed a long shower by the time that I finished all 9 movies. I watched a lot of movies on my phone. I watched mostly movies that I've seen before. And I played a lot of just iPhone games, Bloons Tower Defense, Plants vs. Zombies, Flow, Candy Crush, you know. Well, looks like the rain is dying out again a little bit here, so I think we'll just end this video here, and maybe I'll make another one going over the entire story of what happened in Portland, Oregon, because it's quite a doozy. So I'm going to finish my tea and go on with my day, and hope you enjoyed this recap of my 2023 summer tour with Hail the Sun, Being as an Ocean, and Keonashi, and of course our quaint quintet of math rock guys, Origami Button. Thanks for watching.